to start new. I'll live my life to love and serve God. I must tell everyone how good He is. Now, there are many ways that this woman could have viewed herself before coming to Jesus. She might have thought, I have done some wrong things, but I'm really a good person in other ways. In this way, she could have been like people who look into a mirror and they see only the good side. She could have ignored the bad side of her nature. But if she had, her sin and guilt would have still remained in her heart. Her story would have been a sad one. The woman might also have looked in the social mirror and said to herself, well, I've done many wrong things, but other people have too. I'm just as good as they are. But her guilt would have still remained. There would have been no peace in her heart. And she might have looked deeply into herself and said, well, I'm so ugly inside that there's no hope for my soul. I'll just give up on life and happiness. I'll ignore God. That also would have been a sad ending, wouldn't it? But I think the woman saw such hope in the goodness of the life of Jesus Christ that she suddenly believed that it was possible for humans to have some power over sin and wrong. Everything that Jesus did was beautiful and right, and it showed the love of God. The woman felt that if she could know God's forgiveness, then maybe she could follow Jesus' example and live a new kind of life. She could trust God to help her in even the little things from then on. So from her sin sickness, remember we talked about the sick feelings that she felt. Now, she wouldn't try to cover it up. She could surrender her whole life to Christ. Put it into the hands of God. She saw the true picture of herself and knew that she needed this from the Lord, and that only Christ could do that for her. How do you see yourself? If there were a mirror to see your heart, what do you see reflected in your heart's mirror? Well, now, what about people who are not so sure about whether or not they're a sinner? What about people who are fairly happy with the way they've lived their life? Do they need God's forgiveness? Now we know that Jesus said in speaking to Simon the Pharisee, the story of the two lenders, that they both were forgiven. They could not pay their debts. Neither the one who owed much or the one who owed little could pay the debt. But how did Simon the Pharisee, who invited Christ into his home, how did he see his own heart? I think that when Simon looked at himself, he saw something beautiful. As a Pharisee, which was an important religious group to the Jews in his day, Simon was highly respected. I think he kept the commandments of God as best he could, and he obeyed the religious laws of his people at his best. So Simon's conscience is clear. Society around Simon would probably say, Simon is a good man. And when people spoke to Simon, they would address him with proper respect. Probably they would call him Rabbi. So in his heart, Simon probably felt that he deserved their respect. He's a pretty good guy. However, something disturbed Simon when he heard about Jesus of Nazareth. Simon and his friends were the religious leaders of the day, and when they heard the things that Jesus was doing and saying, that he taught with authority, that he was healing people who are blind, that he was helping the crippled be restored to wholeness again. It caused them to kind of feel jealous because it seemed like Jesus was making himself out to be more than a man. Simon thought to himself, I've been a good leader all of these years. I've taught religion and I've lived the right kind of life. Now this young man comes along and says he's the Son of God. No one can be that good or claim to be so high and special. I must find a way to discredit Jesus. I'm sure I can find some weakness in his character or in his teaching. Then people will know that he is not really the Son of God, Simon thought. I know what I'll do. I'll invite Jesus to my home for dinner. Then I can observe his behavior up close. Jesus will certainly do something wrong according to the laws of God. All that I have to do is find one little thing wrong, one little slip-up, and I've caught him. So Simon made the invitation to Jesus, and Jesus came to Simon's house. When the Pharisees saw that what the sinful woman was doing, right at Jesus' feet and close to the table, at first he thought, well, I'd better have this woman thrown out of my house. It's not good to be here because with the invited guests and everything, she casts kind of a bad image for us. Maybe it'll make me look bad to have that kind of person at all in my house. But then Simon thought, no, wait a minute. This could be just the opportunity that I waited for. And Simon's heart began to pound as he considered the possibilities. This woman is known as a terrible sinner. Her touching Jesus makes it look like Jesus has some immoral connection with her. She's making quite a scene, too. So everyone's watching. This could be good. I'm going to wait and let this continue. Well, more ideas continued to occur to Simon, I believe, as he watched this woman washing and wiping and kissing Jesus' feet. Everyone knows about this sinful woman, and yet Jesus is supposed to be a prophet. As such, he should already have understood what kind of woman she is, and he wouldn't be letting her do this kind of touching if he knew about it. Well, I'll make a comment about this after dinner. But what Simon didn't know was that Jesus right then was reading his thoughts. It was probably pretty easy to tell by the expression on his face. And Jesus had something to say to Simon. Jesus knew that Simon needed to learn something about himself, about what love and forgiveness of God are for all who believe, for all people. And what Jesus used to teach Simon was the simple story of the money lender and the two debtors. In the story, the money lender represents God, who has given each person a certain time for living on the earth. And God knows that the sins of all people, every person, is unworthy and unable to pay back the debt of sin in our hearts. No matter how little we think it is, one sin in one lifetime is too great a debt to pay back for God's holiness, the standard of righteousness that God holds his people to. We couldn't appear before him with even one sin to our credit. So what was difficult for Simon was to see that he too was a sinner. He also owed a debt to God for his mistakes. But Simon couldn't see his own faults until Jesus pointed out the special love, the example of the woman, and the importance of love. Jesus taught that God is love. So failure for any human being to love in a given situation is a sin. Even just failing to love, missing an opportunity to do what is good for another soul. And as a matter of fact, the Scriptures say that one of the great commandments is to love one's neighbor as we love ourselves. If I truly love another person as I love myself, I'll do a whole lot more for them than the nurturing things that I do for my own body and my own heart. Well, Jesus, therefore, pointed out Simon's neglect of even one of the most basic courtesies. When Jesus had entered Simon's house, he had neglected even just the simplest things to do for a guest. Simon had failed to show the simplest form of love by giving or washing his feet with water when he came in. Because in those days, as they wore sandals, the feet got pretty dirty. Simon had failed to greet Jesus with the customary brotherly kiss that the Israelis do to one another. But the woman had not stopped kissing Jesus' feet. Simon had not provided even a little olive oil to anoint the head of his honored guest. This is something that all Jews would do for one that they honored as they came into their home. Simon had failed to do even that. Yet the woman had covered the feet of Jesus with the expensive perfume. Then Jesus explains the great love the woman had shown that proved that her sins, her many sins, are forgiven. She had poured out her love upon Jesus, believing that he would forgive her. Whereas Simon had held back his love, not thinking that he had any need of forgiveness. So what do you see when you look into your own heart? Perhaps in the social mirror, like Simon, you see maybe a rather beautiful person, a nice clean heart. Perhaps you have a high social standing. Many people seem to like you, and when you compare your life to others, do you feel that you're about on the same level with others? See, in the mirror of your conscience, is it clean? Or do you feel guilty or sick about something that you've done in the past? The sinful woman did. Her conscience helped her to see her need for God's love and forgiveness. And that sick feeling doesn't have to stay in your heart. As the sinful woman showed, it's a simple act of asking forgiveness and showing repentance. For her, even using the alabaster, the perfume, which was an item that is used for the prostitute's trade, to give that up showed that she truly repented and she wasn't expecting to have to use it again for that particular lifestyle. So when I do something wrong or make a mistake or realize that I've failed someone in a certain situation, I can become just like that woman. And in my mind, I can bow before Jesus' feet. It's hard for us to imagine it, isn't it? Kissing a person's feet. How humble, how low that position is. And yet in my prayers to God, in my mind, I should be able to imagine myself at his feet and perhaps actually bow down in prayer that low. Imagine that I'm doing that, pouring my heart out to him, confessing the wrong that I see and that I feel in my heart. Lavish that upon Jesus and know by his word that his blood will cleanse me from all sin. His blood wipes that